Dear Lord God, we come to you today again, thankful to be gathered with your people in your house to hear your word today, receive your supper, bless us and keep us in the one true faith through these means. Continue to bless our discussion here as well in Bible study, that we might always give evidence of the things you have won for us in your Son Jesus. We ask this in Christ's holy name. Amen. All right. So the goal is we finish up next week, because in 2 weeks we're going to have a missionary, a guy and his wife that are just going on to the mission field in Romania are going to be with us. It's the brother, it's in the bulletin today, you'll see a little more there, but brother of Pastor Matt Gehring, who is in Norton. So this is his brother, and he and his wife. He's not a pastor. They're going over as teaching English as a second language into Romania, and so they're going to address us on the 10th here in Bible class, and then a little bit afterwards, kind of like we did with Reed, except he won't be preaching. Ben won't. So. But look forward to that. Also, give you the heads up. They're also apparently folk dancers, okay? So, if you want to, you can go over on Friday, August, 8th, I think it would be, and they're having a folk dance at the church, which you can either watch or participate in Norton. So, yeah. And he said if we really like the idea, they could do something for us too. So, yeah.
We can move the
That's right. So if you want a folk dance after church, you have to let me know, and I can probably arrange that too. Have a cupcake and then folk dance. It's better than a potluck and folk dancing, right? That probably wouldn't go as well. All right, so we're going to try to finish this up the next 2 weeks and kind of use that as a breaking point there. So, all right, so we've been working through these funeral guidelines. I guess we could just review real quick. We basically just said, the pastor's going to meet with the family, that we'll use the order of service from our hymnal, which, like I said, to give the people a copy of, and that's probably the other thing. I knew there was one other thing I was going to print out for you. That was probably it, which I didn't, but I have some other things here. Holy Scriptures, no poetry or kind of inspirational readings in the service. And then music we talked about, right? Trying to at least primarily in the service itself using the hymns of the church from our hymnal, with some flexibility there, right? If there's some other piece of Christian music, we could use that somewhere, but that we don't want to use anything that's just sort of secular in nature. And then we said it with the participants, the pastor will kind of lead the service, the organist will provide the accompaniment unless, there's someone else that is doing that. That can be switched out. So then we're up to eulogies, and so we'll just read kind of how it's written here. Any speeches, try to be as general as possible, from people other than the pastor will be offered up at the time of the meal downstairs. Such speeches will not be done in the funeral itself. Pastor will meet with anyone who wishes to share memories with him that might be included in the sermon for the day. So, I guess, the first two kind of go together very closely in the sense of what we've been trying to suggest, and this we've been doing, I think, ever since I was here, and I don't know, maybe before that as well, but that if people wish to speak to the life of the person, again, this is one of those things, we're not saying that's bad in every case, right, or that you shouldn't speak anything of the person in their life. It's a question of where is it best placed, right, to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. And so in general, if you go down to a funeral meal, right, afterwards, this is what's happening anyways, right, is people are coming up and saying, oh, I remember when, Jim and I went fishing, right, and this happened, right, and, kind of sharing those memories, or even just, quick eulogy, just sort of, oh, they were such a great person, or they always made me smile, or, any of these kind of things. So that's been our kind of suggestion that we're putting into these guidelines, is that we would do that downstairs. We do have down there, we have a projector. So once again, if people want to show videos and pictures and all of those kind of things, they certainly can do that. And then, we have the microphones and stuff downstairs too, to make that, very easily hearable. So it's not, it used to be kind of, if you try to do that at a lunch or something, it could be hard just because other people are visiting and stuff like that, and if you don't have any amplification or anything. But downstairs, we're really set up well to do this also this way. And then the last one is, again, happy to meet with anyone, or, I always kind of tell people now, whatever you do, whether it's text, call, email, right? However you like to share those things, write it down and hand it to me. I kind of tell the family and tell them, anybody else that wants to do that. So again, here we're saying we're hoping at least this is the best guideline we can have. So again, it's not that someone could not stand up and give a very good, well put together, even faithful, speaking of the faith of the person. We're not saying they couldn't, right? But we're saying that if we just open it up to people doing this, you're going to end up with a mixed bag, right? Some things that'll be pretty good. Some things that I once gave in, was that back in Ellsworth? Yeah, in Ellsworth. There was a retired Baptist pastor in the family, and he kind of kept pressing and kept pressing. So finally I said, well, I'll give you 3 minutes after the service is all over. You can say a few words. Well, I don't know how long he went on, 20, 25 minutes. And the funeral director, who, I knew by then, he's like, I don't know, I think he out-preached you on that. And he knew exactly what had happened, so he was joking, and basically, he got up and basically said, hey, you Lutherans, you're not really saved because he didn't say it that plainly, but essentially because, you didn't make a decision later in life, you weren't, immersed and had this conversion experience, all this kind of stuff. So you can get something really bad like that, or you can get a lot of things that probably we would say are sort of in between, right? You get eulogies where, again, people say, who are they talking about, right? That's not the person, oh, they were always so kind, and you're like, they were? Like, not to me. No.
I said they were a grumpy old
Yeah,
man.
right, exactly. So again, this is it. And again, one of the ways I know, again, I looked at some of Reed Schoaf's stuff for this, and he always just, on this section, he had, eulogize Christ, not the person. So in other words, right, that's again what we want to do overall is we ultimately want people coming away from our funerals not saying, well, what a great person was that, right? But what a great Savior they had. Now again, if we understand that in its fullness, part of why they were a great person is because God saved them, gave them the Holy Spirit, right? And therefore worked good works in their life, worked the fruits of the Spirit, goodness, kindness, peace, patience, joy, all those things. I don't know, I'll open it up. What do you think about this? What's been your experience with eulogies when you've seen them at different places?
But like you said, they're not giving the glory to God, they're giving the glory to the person.
Right.
A lot of times.
Yeah. And I tend to think that's getting worse just because a lot of times, unfortunately, the generations that want to speak are unchurched, right? And so, if they really gave even like, and sometimes you get this where it's like, gosh, to the lady that died, church was everything. She was there every week. She volunteered wherever, right? And then you get this kind of eulogy again that speaks nothing of her faith, right? It just speaks, oh, she made great chocolate chip cookies. And again, nothing wrong with chocolate chip cookies, right? But you're just kind of like, wow, her whole life was dedicated to this thing, but sometimes the children, they just don't know how to talk about that anymore, or maybe in some sense it feels like a judgment on themselves, right? If they speak too much about that, if they try to say, well, it's so great that she was in church every week, but I haven't been there in 15 years, right? So I think it's getting, again, worse and worse that's going to be more of the thought. And also just because, again, a lot of our funerals in our society are just all this, right? And it's all, again, just about telling stories and laughing. And again, I mean, you get, again, if you've been to some of these things, right, you get some where, I've been to some where pretty evident the person up there speaking has been having a few beers in memory before they, or some sort of liquid courage, right, as they say, before they got up there. And
how long do you let it go on? I mean, it could go on for, you'd be sitting there in church for 2 hours.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, people used to always kind of, complain about Roman Catholic funerals and how long they are, but a lot of these celebrations of life are now starting to rival the Roman Catholics, right? Precisely for that reason, is that it's sort of just open mic night, right? Now, again, I guess one other thing I'd say is there, you could do something, the only other thing I'd sort of at all even consider, and again, I don't really like this plan, but it's something where like the person would submit exactly what they're going to say, right? And you read it over just to make sure there's nothing that would contradict, right, what we're doing. But my experience there again is, one, people don't always stick to the script on the day of, and two, it's just another thing to kind of organize beforehand, right? And again, there's so much going on at that time for the families that often someone will say, well, oh yeah, I'll get that to you on Thursday, and then, the funeral's on Monday, and Sunday night they're calling and saying, oh, how do I get that to you so you can look at it, right? And then you're like, so what if I have to say no now or ask them to really update some stuff? Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of that, and they have it in the church, is strictly for family. You see all these pictures and they're great, but
yeah.
I don't know Aunt Susie.
Right.
Well, and they are, and they're
Yeah.
family
Yeah.
pictures things, or the husband and wife would do. And to me, I just think that strictly belongs to the family. I don't
Yeah.
know if the rest of us care.
Yeah, okay.
Well, we care,
Yeah.
but it isn't.
It's not part of your
meaningful.
experience or your, yeah, right. Yeah. No, I mean, you're right with, those photo boards are probably the best example of that, right? Some people are going to go in every picture, right, the family usually, oh, that's so-and-so, and that's when we went to that,
Yeah.
And then you say, like the other people, and especially sometimes if you have like a long line and you're stuck in front of those photo boards for a while, right? You're like, okay, I remember that was her church directory photo, and that's about all I, kind of would have a memory of there. By the way, church directory photos coming up, remember that. I don't know when it is. I'm bad at that. It'll be in the bulletin.
6th, 7th, and 8th of September.
Hey, look at that.
I just put it in the newsletter.
Okay, there you go. There you go. So that's soon. That's in a couple weeks here. So get your matching clothes and talk your husband into coming, and your kids, right? All those things. Start those things. So yeah, again, and we want to be clear here, because again, I think sometimes we've just said like, oh, eulogies, they're awful, they could never say anything good. That's not what we should say, because that's not true, right? We're just saying on the whole, it works better to throw that stuff downstairs, right? And have somebody by the off button on the microphone if it gets too bad, I always remember, well, I'll tell it anyways. When I was a kid, we'd go down to this, when I was in high school in Kansas City, we'd go down, I don't know why my parents let me go to this place, but it was downtown. It was this Christian, well, that's probably why they let me go. It was a Christian music, it was a church, the basement, they'd have Christian music concerts down there. But, I mean, there were regularly things like drive-bys and stuff down in that area too. But I always liked the owner there, because if a band got up there and they started doing anything other than Christian music, he'd just go yank the cables out and show was over. And it was like, all right, that's the benefit of having your own place, right? You can just call it quits.
Is it just pastor preference that you read the obituary during the service or after the service? After the service and everybody's still...
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things that is a newer kind of probably practice in general. I put it afterwards, and I'll admit, part of it is to give a little bit of this, right? I mean, a recounting of the person's life, but it's very much when I meet with families, it's like one way or the other, right? They either think, well, of course you've got to read the obituary, right? Or they say, why would we read that? It's printed on everything. They've already read it in the paper and on the back of the bulletin, and why would we read it again? And I think I said once, I say, thank goodness I don't have to worry about getting the names right, or even increasingly like the relationships, listed, and you're like, I think that's husband, based on the names, I don't know if that's male or female always, so, trying to get all that right, so.
But you wouldn't give, like you sing the last song, you would go back into your room and take off your robe, dress, as Pastor Keith said, I've got to pick my dress.
Garb, take off your garb.
Take off
There's that garb.
Yeah. And then what? Or what were you saying? Like to let somebody else?
You're singing the last song and Pastor disappears and takes off his robe, whatever, and then comes back in and reads the obituary.
Have you seen that done?
Yes.
Oh. I've never seen that done. I mean, again, it's all about trying. And again, some of this is stuff, probably to be honest, that pastors do, hoping their people will be taught by it. But if you don't say it, they're not taught by it, right? So a lot of these, if there's any sort of wiggle room on any of this, it usually, at least for me, and I know a lot of my friends, it's after the service proper is over. And in our mind, it's the same thing. It's just, it's like, okay, people should know the service is over. But that's probably what those pastors are doing, right, is to give another sign that I've done the service thing, now we're going to do something else.
Well, that kind of makes sense, but it was so obvious, but
yeah.
Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, probably, and yeah. And again, I've known guys that will, kind of, every once in a while too, you'll get in a setting where, you're not going to have a meal at the place or something like that. So I've seen guys too that finally decide, well, I'm going to allow this one person to give a eulogy, and I'm going to, kind of go through the process of asking them to write it down. And they'll do something very similar, or they'll say at the end of, our church service is now over. Now we have, because the sanctuary is kind of the only place we all can fit, we'll do that. And again, I mean, that's definitely a lot up to the individual pastor, right? I mean, I tend to, well, this is just true in general, right? I try to assume pastors are trying to do their best and are trying to honor God, right? And so if they do something a little different than I would do it, I don't try to all of a sudden go crazy and say, well, why didn't they do it exactly the way, right? I mean, again, there can be times where it's, just they miss some of the basic points that we talked about a long time ago that you want to hit in the funeral sermon, and those I kind of go, now wait a second, you didn't ever mention the resurrection of the dead, right, in the sermon. That's not good. But as far as the particularities of these practices, right, because a lot of it, again, we're taking a principle that we want Christ to be honored above all things, right, and then we're trying to apply that to the practice. And again, people are going to come up with little different things. And again, sometimes it'll depend on your facility. It'll depend on your traditions otherwise there at the church, right?
I think obituaries are an old time thing, when people didn't always have newspapers and all of that. And the only place they ever heard more about them was when the pastor would read it.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know, although the older people tell me obituaries were never read in a Lutheran church. I don't know, is that, I don't want to identify anyone as, the older person to ask, but, But I get what you're saying, right? There, if again, and it's kind of the opposite of that thing, is if they're everywhere, why do you need to read it again, right? But if they were nowhere, and again, we forget that it's a fairly recent thing, like to print out a separate bulletin and, some of these things. I mean, even back in the day when the funeral service was not in the hymnal even, right, you still didn't print out a bulletin with all the words, right? The pastor, and the older services were less responsive anyways. There wasn't a lot of congregational responses in them, so. Okay, other thoughts on eulogies at this point? All right. And then I just put this on here just to remind people, right, that we really have two overflow areas, right? This TV here and downstairs on the projector both have a live feed of the service that can be just, basically just turn on the TV and get it to the right source or whatever, and they will play. So if people get worried about space, unfortunately this isn't a concern as much as it probably used to be, just because it seems that less and less people come to funerals. But occasionally we'll do that. I know we had just a couple people in here recently for that service. But just so people kind of know that, like it says, let me know in advance just so we can make sure it works. And since we don't do it very often, it's one of those things you kind of want to check and make sure it still works, I guess you can also go in the nursery. I think the TV in there, on that little tiny TV, if you want a couch, you can sit in there. Isn't there a couch in there? There's not?
No.
Oh.
No, there's a crib in
Well,
there.
bring your own couch. A comfy chair? Comfy chair? All right.
Rocking chair.
Comfy chair from 1952 or something? All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
How about communion?
So we did talk a little bit about that last week, but no, you're good. No, you're good. So basically, again, what I said is that my guess is that Lutherans have typically not done communion for two reasons. One is kind of an overreaction to, in this sense, an overreaction to Roman Catholicism, right? Since they always have the Lord's Supper at a funeral, like, we wouldn't want to do what they do. That's a terrible reason, right? Like, again, judge the thing by itself. Some of the things the Roman Catholics do are not good at all. We shouldn't do them. Some of the things they do are good and God-pleasing things. We can do those, right? Just in general, right? The second thing is then you have the whole question of, all the guests and visitors and who should come up, and how do you explain that in a way where, especially in kind of an emotional time, that people are, say, well, I want to go up there with, the grandson, right, who has no interest in church. Well, I still want to go up there because this is a family gathering, right, more than anything else. But again, I'm open to doing it. Again, I don't think it's a bad practice. We just have to know that up front, that we're going to have some announcement kind of at the beginning again that just sort of explains, our communion policy. So it definitely can be done. I don't know that I've ever done a funeral actually that had the Lord's Supper, but I'd be open to it.
I think,
Anybody ever been to a Lutheran service that does?
yes.
You have, okay. Yeah.
I think it depends. I'm looking at myself.
Yeah.
My whole family's Catholic.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I don't know if there would be enough other people that would come up
Right.
and take communion.
Yeah.
I think you have to sort that out.
Well, yeah, and I think that's part of it too, yeah. I mean, if you were a family where, you kind of knew all your kids and grandkids were all, part of your own church body and stuff, and you say, okay, we'll make some announcement for the other people that might be there. Then again, I mean, that's a very powerful thing, right? To all come together at the Lord's altar. Again, one of the, things I think I've told you before, right? That almost all communion rails, right, are either one-sided, right, or they're kind of a half circle, or maybe a half octagon, whatever, however it's, organized. But the idea behind that always was that the saints in heaven are on the other side, right? It's supposed to be a visual remembrance that this is the place, right, where we get to be with all those saints that have gone before us just for a moment, right? Like we will be on the last day. And so again, at a funeral, wow, that person is now moved from one side of the rail to the other. So it definitely can be something, besides just being the Lord's Supper and Christ's body and blood, it also can be a very, meaningful that day in particular because of that idea of, being with that person in a sense, right? Okay. And
This isn't related to a funeral, but when Nancy and I were getting married, we asked the pastor if we could have communion.
Yeah.
And he said no.
Oh, he did?
But he said, after we had the practice, if the two of you would like to stay,
Yeah.
give you communion.
Okay.
And what was unique about it is when we went up, we both sat on the opposite sides of the church.
Okay.
But when we came back, we sat together.
Oh, yeah.
That just made it that much more
Yeah,
special.
right, yeah. That was kind of a real marker, and we're one now, yeah. Okay. All right, graveside. We'll use the service of committal indicated in our hymnals, again, just following our rites and rituals. Other rites, such as military rites, shall follow the committal. It doesn't, that's mostly because that's where, and just how it works best, right? That it's after is nothing either way to say, it's more important, less important, because obviously if you got two things, is the more important the one that goes first or after? That's not what we're trying to do. It's just usually, if you ask, right, the funeral home, I just say, the funeral home director, the military will go after? Yep, okay, good, So no big indication of anything there. It's just, that's kind of the typical way. Then certain rites which are contrary to our belief, such as Masonic rites, are not permitted. So everybody know that in our church body, you're not allowed to be a member of a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod congregation and a member of the Masons. Do you know that? Yeah, some maybe.
Why?
Why? When this is the why. So when this was in Ellsworth also, I was able to go to another funeral where the Masons were there, and the Masons have kind of just a speech that they give that's very rote. It's not a made up for each person. It's the same thing. And basically they have this apron. Do you know this? Masons have this apron they wear, this white apron. And so in one way you might go, hey, we do that, wear white for baptism, or the funeral pall is white, right? But if you listen to their speech, they will tell you that white apron is that person's own righteousness, right? It's their own good works, and it's the only hope they have of the afterlife, right? Because that's ultimately what, Masons, again, this is why Masons do a lot of good things, right? They got the children's hospitals and all these different things, is because they are very driven by being good people, right? That's kind of central to, especially the basics of how they present themselves, right? That's one part, is they're going to give just a message that's 180 degrees contrary to what the pastor just said, right? We're going to say our only hope is in Christ, His forgiveness, His death, His resurrection, and then the Masons would get up and say their only hope is their own righteousness, their own, I almost think they use the word perfection, although again, it's not to say they believe the person is perfected, but it's a word I think they use there. It's been a little while.
So they bury him with the white thing on?
Yes, usually. I believe, I don't know, do they take it? I think so,
My
right?
grandfather was Mason.
Okay.
He was buried with
Right. And again, just so you know, this would be a whole different Bible study sometimes, right? Again. But just so you know, every church body without fail that has ever studied this issue, whether Masonry and Christianity are compatible, every single one of them in the end has come back and say they are not compatible. Right? Now there are church bodies that have never officially studied it that allow it. the biggest of these is the Southern Baptist. If you don't know, the Southern Baptists and the Masons are very tied together in a lot of ways. Like Mike Huckabee, you know Mike Huckabee, right? He's a Southern Baptist, he's also a Mason, right? Different things like this. I mean, there's almost such a connection there that you know, if you're a conspiracy theorist at all, you find lots of things to read on the internet about it. But and you know, they'll say they give, you know, secret hand signals and stuff when they're doing interviews. And I again never know how much of that stuff is real or imagined or a little of both, right?
I just remember in high school, there was a group, the girls that joined the Job Daughters.
Okay.
And I asked about it and was, no, you will not.
Right.
That was all that was said.
Yeah.
But I never really knew.
And the other part with the Masons, so they will, again, that's the speech they give publicly, is the thing about your righteousness being, you know, your own dress, right, is that. So we know that for sure. The other thing is the Masons are, you know, again, they'll say this, they're a secret society, right? That they have a lot of things they don't tell everybody. And again, multiple people, probably we can say hundreds now, have come out of Masonry and will at least say, and again, I don't know if we know how to exactly verify this, that as you go up the scale, the rituals of Masonry are not only weird, but they're directly anti-Christian. They're mockeries of the sacrament and things like that, right? They'll drink, sometimes, they'll say blood, literal blood, out of a skull, you know, things like that. Now again, because it's secret, you can't go ask them, do you do this at the highest? So they're going to say, you don't get to know, right? Or they'll usually say, oh, come on, you know. But, so if everything is said about the Masons, if that's true, like, everyone would just have to say right away, no, that's just plain satanic, right? I had a guy in Minnesota, every time, and it's a long story, but, you know, he was a member of the church. Everyone knew he was a Mason, but no one had really talked to him about it or done it. Well, no, someone had talked to him about it, but it kind of just got stuck there. And, you know, when I'd go and talk to him, he would, you know, he'd always try to convince me to be a Mason, and I'd convince him not to be, and neither of us got anywhere.
I was involved in the study of the Masons at our church in Iowa.
Yeah.
And one of the things that always bothered me was to become a Mason. One of the first things they did is they would kind of like bury you, and they would raise you and say, see, you don't need Christ.
Oh, okay. I've never heard that one, but yeah.
Well, right away I said, whew.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So again, I tend to think that's probably true, that some of their rituals are just strictly aimed at mocking Christian sacraments and things like that. Just because there's so many, again, that have come out and said that. Now again, the Masons every time will say, well, they're just mad at us, right? So they're trying to say this stuff that isn't really true. So, but I would say that, you know, that's the main one that, and there are other, you know, a few of these other, and I always get this confused, which one's always, you know, some of the other orders of different things are more like the Masons, and then, you know, you've got like the Lions and things like that that are not tied to that, right? It depends on the animal, right? I don't know. You know, the Loyal Order of Elk or something, you know, I don't know. The Grand Poobah, for those that were Flintstones friends,
You're not
fans.
buried, your ashes are scattered, and you don't have the pastor. You just
Yeah.
some up
Yeah.
mountains or something.
Yeah.
Is that?
Again, I wouldn't say it's the best practice, but I wouldn't say it's forbidden, right? Even increasingly, like, it seems to me that graveside services, sometimes the family is just saying like, oh, we don't, especially if it's any distance away, right? They'll say, oh, you know, Pastor, we don't want you to come out. And I always say, I'm coming, you know. Not like against their will,
Right.
but like, if that's their only concern, right, is they don't want to inconvenience me, it's like, no, let's go do this full thing, right? Yeah. So, but it certainly doesn't affect your salvation, right? Yeah. Then again, since we're handing these out, I just put here again, and ladies, tell me if there's anything that needs to be changed here. But the ladies of the church would love to serve you a meal. On the day of the funeral, pastor will put you in touch with them to make choices. If you wish to make a donation to help cover the cost of the meal, that's appreciated but not absolutely necessary. Is that all right or not?
It is appreciated, period.
Just end it there. And again, my only thing is if we, and this, I think this is the problem, is a lot of times if that's not being done, and again, we know the family would be able to do it, right? That again, if we really had someone that we just know is strapped, you know, like I think as a church, we always should just step up and say, we'll figure it out, right? Whether that's, let's just do a potluck for this one, or, you know, used to be like ham sandwiches, but now ham's like, you know, $20 a pound, right? So I don't know what's still cheap. Egg salad, maybe? If, well, that's getting more expensive
No,
too,
eggs
yeah.
are expensive.
Yeah. But this is one thing though, teach your kids this, and I know it's hard to like figure out when you do this, but if you're going to another funeral, you know, and you're just kind of talking about things, if you can find a way to bring up some of these things that have just been done, because I'm convinced most people that do not make a donation, they didn't know they were supposed to, right? No one really told them. They never had, you know, and again, it is one of those things usually, right? It's one person in the family kind of secretly takes a check and holds it in the kitchen to see who will take it, right? Or something like that. So it's not something we talk about a lot, and I think it can, you know, it can be a source of strife between brothers and sisters in Christ, where we're like, well, why didn't, you know, you just spent, you know, you had the pearl encrusted diamond casket, right? And you didn't give us, you know, $50 for some ham or something, right? But again, I'm convinced in most cases it's simply that the younger generations, they just don't understand kind of how this used to be done.
Isn't that also true with the minister doing the service?
Yes, yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
a lot of people don't know that.
Right, and that, again, that's becoming more common too, right? And again, I mean, I always tell people, this is my job, right? When they ask, I say, this is my job. I'm happy to do it. If you know, want to give an honorarium, fine, but you don't need to, right? But again, you're right. There's a lot that just don't know it. The only difference there, and maybe we could do this better with the funeral home too, is usually the funeral home puts that in their fees. So that's the only difference, is usually if they didn't do that, right, I think it'd be exactly the same.
So they pay you.
Yes,
Because that's
typically.
what I understood when we went.
Huh?
And musicians.
And musicians, right,
Yeah.
typically.
Yeah, okay.
Again, you can tell the funeral home, I want to do that myself, and some do, but for most people, they like that convenience of, because usually the flowers are in there, kind of, is that, I think that works that way here in town too, that, you know, basically you go down, pick out flowers for the funeral at one of the flower places, and they just bill the funeral home, and the funeral home bills you, right? So that you kind of just have one bill to pay instead of going around, which if any of you have lost a loved one, you know there's plenty of details and financial things you have to do already, right? So most people are like, oh yeah, you can do that, let's do it that way. All right. And then we kind of said this at the beginning, but right, I thought I'd put this on the actual guidelines. Maybe it should be at the top, I don't know. But it says 3 prime reasons lay behind the offering up of these guidelines in advance. First, we don't want there to be any unnecessary strife at the time of the funeral because the guidelines are simply assumed or not stated clearly. So in other words, that's why we put this in the newsletter and right? Some guidelines, if the elders make, you know, we just kind of make them and they sit there, and right. But this, we said what we'd like to have is that our members know this, right? That these are the kind of guidelines, so that when we get there, because it's the worst thing when people are already emotional, and then you're fighting it out over this song or that eulogy, right? It's very hard. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Secondly, we want to treat all members the same throughout the years, because this is another thing that someone will say, well, you know, my daughter, and she's going to give a great eulogy. You should know that, right? And then I have to try to explain to them. Sometimes I could say, Yeah, you're probably right. She'd probably do great. But the next funeral, it's going to be Uncle Jim who wants to tell drinking stories, right, at the funeral. And so that's another reason we have these guidelines, is so that there can be no sense in which, oh, these people, maybe they gave more, so you're letting them do this, or they, whatever. No, we just treat everybody the same in that way. And third, and most importantly, right, we wish to honor Christ and make his victory over death the center of the funeral service. All right. I think that's the end, right, of that. Any other questions on that? Feedback?
I
Yeah.
think you kind of answered it, but you were talking about the Masons.
Yeah.
Are the Elks different from that? Because my brother is really into the Elks. I mean,
That's one I'd have to look up. Does anybody know? I was kind of thinking the Elks are more like the Masons.
he was like the Grand
That's what I
Poobah.
thought.
Yeah.
Not Grand Poobah, but I don't know what they call him.
Yeah.
But that's what he was for,
Yeah.
and they go to all kinds of things at the Elks Club. I
Right.
don't think they ever go to church.
You're right.
That's right.
Yeah. That would be my guess. And that's the other thing with the Masons in particular that I do know is, this guy that I visited, he would always say, well, there's nothing contradictory between the Masons and Christianity, right? And again, when someone says that, that's why I always go to that story of what I heard at the funeral from the Mason, because that's public. Because if you start arguing with the Masons about these secret things, in some senses, they may not really know. They're not that high up, and they say, no, they're being honest. We don't do anything like that, right? Well, maybe later on they'll find out they do, right? What was the other thing I was going to say?
Not really ever talked to him about it, but.
Yeah. But the Masons will say, they'll even encourage you sort of to have a higher power or something like that, right? But again, if you read their stuff, they're very clear. They don't care who that is, right? But I'm not positive, but my brain tells me that Elks are more like Masons than Lions.
I can always Google it too, but-
Yeah. All right, anything else? I should tell this story too. You maybe remember in the church one time since I've been here, I told the story of Peck Ranker, who was this guy that, and I think I might have even told it in this class again, this guy that never had been to church. His wife was a faithful member, and his nephew called me one day and said, my Uncle Peck's dying, and I don't think he knows Jesus. Will you visit him, right? And we got to go over, and again, I went over, shared the gospel with him. We baptized him before his death. We had the funeral in the church. And I'm just, like I said, rejoicing over this, right? This is one of these pastor, you go, God is good. He's worked all things out here, and all of this. And then they said, oh yeah, and the Masons, right, will then do their ritual, the family. And I said, oh, here I thought everything was going smooth, right? Thankfully, in this sense, it was all right in the sense that when I talked to the family about it, they said, oh, that's all right. We don't need to have them come. He was a member, but he wasn't real involved, right? He kind of got involved early on for business, right? And that's, Masons use that a lot. It's a networking thing at the beginning, right? Just get to know other important people in the community, right? And then from there, it goes on. But so when I went, going over to the family to talk about the Mason thing, I was, very nervous, very how's this going to go? And trying not to take the joy out of what had just occurred. And then the family, they say, oh, no trouble. That wasn't a big deal. And so then I thought again, everything's, just falling in line. And then I'm driving home and the phone rings. And it's the funeral home director. He says, what's the trouble with the Masons? So I told him. Found out the funeral home director was a Mason. So, but we get along to this day. So I guess, it wasn't all bad. So, yeah. All right. Got a couple more minutes here. What can we do now? These are just these are more practical, at least the first couple. right? Put your things in order legally, financially. Maybe I should put here your attic and your garage. No, that shed that you can't get into anymore or whatever. No, make funeral plans with the funeral home, right? Any funeral home will, do this in advance. Sit down and, you get to pick some things yourself if that's important to you. You also just take the burden of pay, even if you don't really care what color your casket is or whatever. Still it just takes something that the family won't have to decide at the time. Obviously, and I'm not going to say much about this first one because this is not my area of expertise. I'm not going to tell you legally how to arrange your estate or something. If you followed my advice, you'd be in big trouble. I'm certain of that. Just because it's bad. Like I wouldn't know what I was talking about mostly. But what else was I going to say? Oh, the funeral, of course, home will also, I don't know exactly how this works right now, but, you can pay a little bit, right, all the time, and then your funeral, you kind of have a little savings account. Anybody got one of these and willing to share it or how that works? No?
Be a teacher.
Be a teacher?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because
Because if you
you pay into that and then you get
Oh,
bonus back.
Okay. All right.
capers,
Oh, okay. You have funeral benefits there, right? Okay. Other things, and again, this stuff, write down as much as you can, right? You always think, oh yeah, next Christmas I'm going to tell them, all this stuff, right? Write it down and put it somewhere where they'll at least come upon it, right? Again, my mom has told me 40 times where the important papers are, and it would still take me a little bit to remember, right? When I got there to her house where I
I don't know
looked.
how many people know the church has forms for you to fill out too.
Right, and I'll give you something here in a little bit that's kind of like that, yeah. Yeah, so just, anything you can do in advance. The only caveat to this I would give you is if, today, God forbid you were to be in an accident and you're in the hospital and they tell you it's not looking good, don't freak out if this stuff's not done, right? God will take care of your family, right? This is better to do. It helps out, but again, God will take care of us. This is one of these places where I just wonder sometimes, how much do we give evidence that we really believe God will take care of us in times of trouble, right? I could give a whole speech on that. But, any of these things. Tell them where you want to be buried, right? Everybody assumes everyone knows those things. Well, of course I want to be buried, back in my hometown where, my great-grandpa was buried. Everyone should know that. If that's true, write it down, right? And tell somebody both. The other thing is, speak about your death. Now this one's kind of controversial. My sister hates to death, I didn't really mean to say that, but she does. If my parents mention anything about them being gone, she hates it. She hates it, right? And I'll admit, this is my opinion, but this is one way you can prepare your family. Again, don't have an event like, we're going to have a dinner where all we're going to talk about is that. But again, don't be afraid to just say those little things like, oh, when I'm gone, right? I want to have this hymn sung, right? Little things like that. Both, it can help practically. It also, I think, just helps prepare people in advance that that's a reality that's going to happen. Right? And ignoring it just kind of makes it seem more impactful, right?
Before my parents' death, they wanted to be cremated, but they had to get permission from us that they could be cremated.
Okay, yeah.
That seems so strange. I thought, well,
Yeah.
That must just be an Iowa thing.
yeah, I think it's just an Iowa thing.
Oh, you mean like legally?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never heard of that either. So, yeah, this is one thing you'll find if, you're really bored sometime, go and search funeral guidelines by states. And there are weird things hidden in those laws for what you can do, what you can't do, what is required in this situation or whatever. All right. The next thing, spiritual things. Let me give you these now. If somebody, I can. Sure, but it's 2 per person, so top 2, they're collated, or whatever that word is. That's the right word, isn't it?
Yes.
All right. So give everybody just the top 2 pages and then move to the next person. So this is one, write your own obituary. And this is kind of a hinge between these two. It's very helpful practically. Again, I know you think your children have all listened to you exactly about who your great aunt and her name was, and where she came from, but maybe not. So write that down. It saves your loved ones a lot of time and especially because people want to do that right? It's one of those things that you're very concerned, am I going to get all this right? It's going to be, in the paper, it's going to be there on Ancestry.com now for the next 2,000 years, right? I want to get this right. So help them in that, practical sense of just getting the dates, things like that, okay? On one of the sheets that's going around, so there's one that says something about a will on the top, not that one right now. The other one has 3 sort of templates. So the one without the church on it, has 3 sort of little templates. These I actually stole directly from Reed. He gave me permission. But this is something he had found or wrote up, or a little of both, I think. They just give you examples of how to include your spiritual life in your obituary, right? So you might list where were you baptized, right? You might, again, put that you were it used to be almost standard, so-and-so was a member of this church, right? And again, you don't see that as much, partially because they weren't, right? But partially just, again, I think, people forget that. So again, these are obviously not dropped down from heaven perfect, but these are, if you want something as you're doing this process, if you want something to kind of say, how can I make sure that even in my obituary, it's clear that my ultimate hope was in Christ, right? So we won't go through those. I'll just leave those to you. And if you ever need help with that, certainly willing to help there. The other sheet then, the thing that says will, and again, that's, this is another thing that Reed had sent me, and I just kind of updated it and I changed a few words in there. But he told me this, right, that he called it the funeral service will. One sense, will just means, what do you want to be done, right, when you're dead? That's your will, right, your last wishes. But he told me he did this, right, hoping that it would add a little bit more weight to it, right, that when, it's not necessarily a legal document. I suppose if you had everybody witness it and stamp it, maybe it would be, right? But it's,
If the challenge.
Right, yeah, that too, probably. But it's just at least, again, if your family is likely to sort of go with what you want, this just kind of tells them directly. And again, like when I say write things down, put headings and stuff too, because I get a lot of people too that'll come in and go, well, Grandma highlighted this verse, but we don't know whether she liked it or she really didn't like it. Or not highlighted, but they'll say, there was a note out to the side, and so there's some question as to, was this, or even like a good example would be like a little question mark out to the side. Could either mean, is that something I'd want for my funeral? Right? Or it could mean, I don't get this verse at all, right? So, try to write down scriptures to use in funeral, right? Be very, very specific. But that form there has that on I think it's on the back side, is it? Front bottom has the scriptures, I think, right? And then the back has the hymns. Again, you can always give your family freedom to say, if for some other reason, if in the last 2 weeks of life, we for some reason heard a hymn in church and we all just loved it all of a sudden as a family, and we were, just loving it, we were talking about how much we love this hymn, and then you look at this sheet and it's not on there. It's not like you can't use that, right? So give them some freedom, but give them the benefit of saying, here's the things I would like to have. Okay? note in writing that you want a traditional Christian funeral at your church with the emphasis on Jesus. Now, that's one of these things you would not have had to say a generation ago or something like that. But I do think that's important. That's one of the things where this will idea gives you an easy way to do that. That's basically what it says is, I want a funeral service with the hymnal with my pastor leading it, right? And again, just as the way to do that. And again, if there's something else there, if you say, oh, it'd be great if, this former pastor could read one of the scriptures, or, I've got a daughter who sings beautifully, I'd like her to sing a solo. Put any of that down, right, just so people know. And then the last one is spend some time pondering dying well in the faith. The story from my ministry that always comes to me is, actually it was one of the hardest things for me in coming here, was that I had a dear lady in our church who was, what was she, probably late 40s, early 50s maybe, who had been diagnosed with cancer. And when I got the call here, she had been through some surgeries that, when they described what they did, amazing that you could keep a person alive with the amount of cutting they did to get the cancer out. But she was not, she was not well when I left, and I think it was, maybe 6 months later, she died. That was one of the hardest things for me just as a pastor, is I felt like I wanted to walk with her through that whole, process. But eventually as a pastor, you realize, God will probably send someone else to help her, right? I'm not that important, and things like that. But I remember when she came in, she was a very organized person. She was a pilot, super smart. And she kind of came in and she had, all these different notes and books, and she was trying to figure out. But one of the questions was basically this: how do I die well in faith?